All right, let me try not to butcher your name. Myriam Charabaty. Thank you for joining me in the trenches.
You are welcome. I am really happy to be here. And I've watched a lot of your episodes, and I think we're going to have an exciting conversation.
Is it loud where you are?
Most days. Some days not. Depends. I'm in central Lebanon. So for most people that don't know Lebanon, Lebanon is pretty much after the civil war divided into a sectarian, more or less divide, even though they're not like unbroken lines of sectarianism. Like, no, like in what we call a Christian area, you would find Muslims, but it's predominantly Christian. The type of culture is closer towards Christian culture, and more Islamic dominated regions, the day-to-day life is more closer towards the Islamic kind of day-to-day life. A lot of regions are really mixed at this point. So I'm in Mount Lebanon, which is basically what they call the Maronite stronghold. So it's a Christian Maronite stronghold. Historically, the war has been between Maronites and the Druze in the Islamic sects. However, this was solved decades ago, only to resurface during the Civil War in 1975. But ever since, it's really been mixed into it. But centrally here, we don't really hear much, and we don't see much of the wars, really, because it's, how do I say that gently? It's the location in which the leading group, which is a sectarian group, so even the church here has had that position in various periods of history. They're allied to the Israelis. Bashir Gemayel, who wanted to make peace with the Israelis and was assassinated by the Lebanese, was from the region I'm from. So they more or less, it's kind of considered the safe hub in the Middle East. It's where it doesn't get bombed no matter who gets bombed. However, I think this is going to change very soon. I expect that to strategically change. But for now, it's been more or less quiet, yeah.
What is your background?
I'm Lebanese, born and raised. I was born here, raised here. I did immigrate, as most Christians here do. So every Christian household in Lebanon, specifically, has at least one or two members of their family that have immigrated. I lived in Canada for a good 7 years, 7.5. And then I went to Germany for about a year, and then I decided I want to come back home. This is where I belong. This is where I have something to offer. So I decided to come back. But I am very much born and raised here, very attached to the land and the history of the land and our existence in the land. And when I say our existence, I don't speak here from a sectarian perspective. I speak from a purely national Arab perspective, because I do believe that the Arab national identity is a cumulative, collective, all-encompassing identity. If you eliminate any component of it, you break it down. And so I don't think eliminating any component, which is one of the things that the West has tried to do in more ways than one, is to break that Arab identity, turn it into this Islamic identity, into a Takfiri identity, into an identity that's so devoid and separated from the Christian West or the civilized West, which is really, to put it nicely, it's bullshit, because Christianity started here. Civilization started around here, right? Somewhere between Africa and the Arab world, we saw the rise of civilization and its growth. Even if in separate ways, we saw the growth of civilization from that part of the world. And so when we talk about breaking down that Arab identity, we're inherently talking about making sure that no Arab nation would rise for another century, right? Because that's the idea, that's the threat, really. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I actually would like to know a little bit more about your background, because you're very, very vocal on social media. So you're a type of activist journalist, is that right?
Yeah. I've been working in journalism for the past 4 or 5 years. But I did not reach journalism because it's my dream job that I've always wanted to do. And in fact, a bit back into my history, I was a musician. I came from a very different place. It's
that's
my
great.
search. It's my personal search for identity that drove me towards journalism, towards the work that I do. It's my search for who I am, where do I belong, why were we raised the way we were raised? Because where I was raised, we were raised in a concept where a Muslim is different from you, right? It's like a hold, and I had to question it when I emigrated. I had to question it because when you get to Canada, suddenly everyone that speaks Arabic is your brother, right? And I'm like, well, why was that not the case in Beirut? What was different in Beirut? And I realized it's the legacy of the Crusaders that we still carry here in Mount Lebanon, and in a lot of places in the region, where the idea is that we seem to believe that we are remnants of that great Western civilization kind of legacy, and we want to keep it safe or something. So we developed over generations a mindset that's not Arab, a mindset that is actually an enemy of our own identity, right? And I think this is not something that only we have done. I think we see that in a lot of places in the world. I think we even see that in Africa. Maybe you can talk a bit about that, or you have, where you see a lot of Africans kind of from a position of self-hating their own history and identity to say, look, we are better than this. And then they take a model that's very different from their social fabric and structure and say, well, this is what we want because this is the way, and that's kind of the idea, but we're talking here over hundreds of years. So when I went to Canada and I figured that, well, we are Arab. Shocking, right? A Christian Maronite is an Arab. And that does come as a shock because there's the whole argument here that, oh, we are Phoenician. But this is something that was pushed very often by the West, because even if you look at Phoenicia, it's a civilization, first of all. It's not a nation. Second of all, if you look at Syria, the hub of the Phoenician civilization was actually in Syria, not in Lebanon, right? And so when we look at that and when we think about that, and we realize how that identity is being used and abused to propagate a geopolitical strategy, to turn us into tools for that geopolitical strategy, what do we do with that then, right? And that was the question that I found myself in front of. And the second question I found myself in front of was, because I grew up Christian. My mother taught us a lot about Islam growing up. She's Christian, but her idea was we live in a country where everybody lives here, and what you don't know, you fear, right? So she kind of broke it down to us from a younger age. But I was never really religious growing up until I went to Canada. And I was faced with my own journey there, which everybody, I believe, faces their own personal journey at some point in life. You go through your ups and downs, you figure out who you want to be, what you want to be, how you want to think, right? And then you're bombarded with all of these ideas, especially in a place like Canada, where the liberal mentality is really at its peak. So what I really faced was who I want to be and what values do I want to hold and what fits with my understanding of the world and narrative. And I found myself defending faith from a perspective of understanding human value, right? That was the initial position. And then I started introspecting into who I am, the way I grew up, my faith, my religion. And I found myself feeling more at home, more safe in my own faith, in my own religion, the way I understand it. Not in the way that the West wants us to understand it. Christianity is not an enemy of Islam. They're not opposites. They're not contradictory. They're not at war with each other. It's this conception of what Christianity is, and that, I don't know, the whole idea that Jesus Christ believes that only Christians will make it to heaven. What is this? What is this? Right? There's nothing like that in our faith. Nowhere. He does speak of love for all. Right? He does say that those that have faith in me are closer in their worldly life and in their afterlife to God, right? But that has to do with understanding the commandments that he gave. It's not about going to church, it's about living like a Christian, right? And when we look at that, and when we look at the commandments of Jesus Christ, then we look at Islam, and really there's a lot more similarities than there are differences, because we do believe in the one same God. We do have faith in the one same value system, even if it manifests differently, right? So that's really where I came from, and where I came to journalism from the idea that we must defend our identity, because our identity is really, truly one of the most civilized, founded in humanitarian understanding of what it means to be human, and not in the geopolitical argument of defending human rights and military intervention. These are two different concepts. They stole our language, our terminologies, our value scale, and turned it into a tool against us. And we stood for a long time saying, okay, I don't know how to deal with this. Because you're using a language that for me means one thing and for you means another, and I don't know how to argue that, how to fight that. But truly, over time, we realized that on the ground, no, there is a way to fight that, and it's called the resistance.
You're saying that Christianity and Islam are allies, and have many overlapping values. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's what you've experienced growing up in the Middle East as a Christian.
Very much so. Very much so. Actually, a couple of my best friends are very devout Muslims, and we can spend every day together without really any conflict.
But if they are so overlapping, what is the point of being a Christian or being a Muslim?
It has to do with your faith, right? So here it goes back to the question of, is Christ the Son of God? This is what we believe. We believe that he was crucified and that he resurrected on the third day, right? This is what we believe. Islam does not believe in that. Muslims do not believe in that. However, that difference in faith, in the very details of the ideology of faith, does not create a problem on the day-to-day life in a structural social fabric. It really does not. And even if you go into Islam a bit deeper, you realize that they call Christ the soul of God. They value Christ as a prophet. They value Mary. And there's one thing significant in Islam is that whenever they talk about their faith, they talk about it as a continuation of everything that came before it. They go back to Adam and Eve. They go back to Abraham, right? And so when you do that historical mapping, you inherently put the people or the followers of that faith in a position where they have to accept everyone that came before them. They don't consider anyone that came before them an enemy of their faith, right? And in doing that, we saw that Christianity and Islam have been able to coexist for centuries, really. And had that not been the case, there would not be any one church left to toll the bells, because the region has been under different Islamic rules for a long time. And despite all of that, you still find a church in almost every town, in every area in the Middle East.
What about the Crusades?
The Crusades. The Crusades is the most interesting thing to talk about, really, because the Crusades even considered Christians that did not Latinize to be equal enemies to them as the Muslims. So we were equally killed, really, as Arab Christians. We were equally killed by the Crusades. We were equally fought by the Crusades. Our culture was fought by the Crusades. Because we were put in position, we either give up our own rituals and our own manifestation, ideologies, etc., and accept Latinization as the one true form of Christianity in the face of the indigenous Christians of the region, right? Or we are enemies of the Crusaders. And so this is pretty much what happened. A lot of the Christians actually fought alongside Muslims in the Crusades. And we see that in Haifa, we see that in Al-Quds, we see that in a lot of parts of Lebanon and Syria.
So growing up as an Arab Christian in the Levant, effectively, actually is a fairly peaceful experience.
Hello. When we talk about peaceful experience, we have to say here that the West has infiltrated both Christianity and Islam. So in a lot of places where Islam has been infiltrated by a British or American takfiri ideology, or kind of a Muslim Brotherhood, a British version of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, no, we did not see peace. Because among the chief things that I was talking about in the beginning, for the West, it's important that the region gets emptied of Christians, really, and turn it into this evil Islamic region. And in a lot of places, they have succeeded. And in a lot of places, we see that the church is complicit in that. For example, during the war in Syria, immigration was opened through church facilities, through entire churches. And there are regions where entire churches were uprooted from one place to another because it was easy, it was fast. Instead of telling the people, we will help you defend your land, your identity, your belonging, you have the right to stay here, people were being told, let us get you out, it's the only safe option for you. You will have a better life. Why would I have a better life in a faraway place, but you wouldn't help me, fight the enemies of both our faith and our land and identity on this land where I belong, where my children belong, where my ancestors have belonged, right? So these questions came up a lot as I was growing up. And I think when we talk about Christians living peacefully in the region, we have to be very careful about who was attacking Christians in the region, at what point, and for what cause. Right. So when I look at, when I look at Christians living in southern Lebanon alongside, let's say, the Islamic resistance, I don't see anyone that was threatened by that. And they live a very normal life, really. If you go to Sur, which is within the influence of the Islamic resistance, you can go for one of the best beach parties you can imagine, I'm sure, and no one will talk to you about this. The truth is, when we do the same and we go to HTS, which is now a non-terrorist organization, right? When we go to HTS in Damascus, how do Christians feel? How do Sunnis that are non-takfiris feel about that? Right? And see here, it's a very delicate subject. Islam is one big title that is not all the same, and it has been infiltrated. For God's sake, we have Christian Zionism, and I think it's one of the most evil versions of faith that could exist. So Islam has its version of Zionism, and it's really takfiri Islam.
Why generally is that whole region so hated by the West?
I don't think it's particularly hated by the West. It's the most desired by the West. But the truth is that this region, whether it's the Levant or the Greater Arab Peninsula, it has been one of the regions that fought for its existence deeply for centuries. And truly the West, even until now, has not been able to break that. So every century, every era, if you want to say, has its own version of resistance that re-emerges in ways that fit the needs or the requirements of the time. So if we look at what the West wants from this region, it definitely wants a non-Arab nation to rise. There is no room for an Arab nation in the eyes of the West, right? If an Arab nation does come to be united, strong, powerful, do you imagine the capabilities of this region with the riches of this region? Same thing to Africa, right? Do you imagine these areas rising to their true potential? What happens to the West? A, they can no longer steal and exploit our riches. B, who will do the work for them in their countries, in their continents? Who runs the US or Canada or Europe? And I'm not talking about who runs it financially. I'm talking about who runs it on the ground, who makes things work. Right? It's really not white Europeans that do that. And in Canada, it's known that it's the Arabs that helped build a lot of regions in Canada. Anyways, and not to go into the detail of that, but if we rise as a nation to our full potential, we actually become one of the most encompassing in terms of social fabric and components within that social fabric. We become one of the most capable nations because we have experiences from all over the world, in all fields of the world. And we become an area that blocks Western exploitation, not just of this region, but the rest of Asia. The influence of the West in all of Asia and all of Africa is very much tied to what happens here. So if this nation is independent and neither kind of west-leaning or right-leaning or east-leaning, right? It's independent in its own identity. What happens? What happens to the rest of the world and the rest of the world from a perspective of Western influence, right? And this is not new. This really goes back to the Crusader era. And some would argue even before. But yeah, this is what we're looking at, and this is why it's very much desired, and this is why it's very much infiltrated. And it's infiltrated over centuries in many different ways, to an extent that some people cannot see these things as infiltrations anymore, but as natural occurrences, which they really are not.
But as I said a moment ago, the Western perspective of the Arab world is severely impoverished. I mean, if you speak about Arabs, it's just a bunch of brown Muslims, and that's it. I mean, it's as crude as that. But I mean, anybody who knows a basic bit of history of the region will know that it's exceptionally multi-ethnic, multicultural, and it has a long history going back to biblical times. When you say nation, then what do you mean?
When we talk about the Arab nation, we're talking about the world in a post-Sykes-Picot perspective. The borders that we live in today, while they have their benefits, and they've had their benefits for some time, they're truly colonial at core. And what that means is that they are made to serve their roles, and these roles serve Western influence and not local benefits. So when we break down the world as we know it after World War II, we can see that an Arab nation is something that truly is not understood by the West. However, the Jesuits, the Jesuits have understood that very well, and they were one of the first ones to come to that region and study it as a whole and not as a divided segments. And they were the ones that influenced a lot the decision making in the West for Sykes-Picot. So when we talk about the Arab nation, we talk about something that is not inherently colonial. We talk about the actual identity and the history and the tribal extension of the people of the region with their shared cultures and histories. For example, it is one of the things that are very well known is that people from Jabal Amil, which is southern Lebanon, extended all the way to Palestine. Jabal Amil, the people of Jabal Amil, go back in history to Yemen. And most Christian Maronites in Lebanon extend back to Syria. A lot of the Baqa extends to Huran. And my family, specifically, we come from Al-Khalil, from Palestine. So when you look at that, this is the Arab nation we're talking about. We're talking about going back in history to what used to exist before the West kind of took hold and held it in their hands and kind of strangled every aspect of its life. So now if I go back to my family and I tell them, listen, we're originally from Palestine, they will not be happy about it. Right? Because we're Christian Maronites, we're from Mount Lebanon. Well, not really. We're not, you know.
But Myriam, I mean, if you follow social media, we all know Palestine didn't ever exist.
Yeah, because there isn't the letter P in Arabic. If we go back to understand why the Zionist movement wanted Palestine, and actually they did not want Palestine. They wanted Greater Israel, which is from the river, the inside rivers, all the way to the sea and taking over. First of all, I'm going to go back in history before going back in theory. If you go back to Bludan, the conference of Bludan in 1946, it was held in Syria, and it was, I think, under President Shukri al-Qawatle at the time in Syria. It was in 1946, so it was before the Nakba. And the British offered to say, well, we're going to give that piece of land right over to the Jews. You know, it's really funny because this is something that people never look back into. The conference of Bludan, there was a whole negotiations in the conference that says, well, we do not believe that bringing the Jews from Europe to this region is the right thing to do for the Europeans to solve their Jewish problem. What? Come again, right? It comes as a shock if you bring that forward today, because nobody talks anymore about how, well, Europe had a Jewish problem, right? Regardless of whether I believe it was a Jewish problem or all of that debate of what was going on in Europe. But they had a problem with what do we do with the Jews in the region, because nobody wants them in Europe. And so they decided to bring them over here. Why did they bring them over here? Now, that's a different question. The reason is, in my humble opinion, is that they needed to create something called the barrier state. The barrier state, I believe, goes back to Napoleonic kind of mentality, where it's a location. You take over a piece of land, you bring in a people that is impossible to integrate in the region. You give them an upper hand militarily and financially. And whenever anything in its surrounding tries to raise its head up, you shoot it down. And so I think that's precisely what Israel is. It's a barrier state. It has succeeded for the past 100 years, but I don't think it will succeed much longer anymore.
And it's not biblical either.
Nah, nah. Definitely not biblical. If we look at the biblical history, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims of the region are the Semites. Right? It was the Jews that later parts of them became Christian, and part of those Christians that became Muslim. It's not somebody that came from elsewhere. It was the people of this land that moved from Judaism to Christianity to Islam. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam don't come in confrontation with each other. They come in continuation of each other. They come in a sequential following, is what I mean. And so they came after each other. They didn't come at the same time, and then people fought about it. They came really consequentially after each other, and people moved from one faith to another for many reasons, some for financial, some for social, some for true belief. But all of that is to say that it's the Jews of this region, the Christians of this region, the Muslims of this region that have biblical right to this land. That's about it. That otherwise, the people of Israel in the Bible, they're not an actual people. You know what I mean? It's not an actual piece of land with an actual people. This is just a Christian Zionist perspective of it. In fact, if anything, Christianity came for all the people in the world. Christ came to save everyone, regardless of whether they knew or they did not know what they were doing. Right? This is the salvation we believe in. This is the salvation he spoke of on the cross. And his most sincere commandment, in my opinion, is pretty simple. It's there is no greater love than to sacrifice oneself for those you love. Right, and this in our modern understanding, it's what martyrdom is. It's what martyrdom is in Islam as well. It's to sacrifice yourself for what you think or you believe God has intended for the human being to live in value and dignity. And in doing that, we realize that there is really nothing biblical about current Israel and Zionism in occupied Palestine. There's nothing biblical about it. It's about solving a Jewish problem. It's about creating a barrier state, and it's about geopolitical influence.
Are there Jews in Lebanon?
There used to be. We still have synagogues in certain areas in Lebanon. However, most of them left the country or changed from Judaism to Christianity or Islam. But there are still the towns that used to, its residents used to be Jews, continue to have those names. So whatever begins with the word khirbi in Lebanon used to be a Jewish town, probably. A lot of the Jews from Lebanon moved to Damascus after the Nakba. Because one of the things that the British were doing is that they were pushing all of the Jews of the region into Israel, not just by choice, but by force. So that's one of the things that I think it would be good if you can have an Arab Jew to talk about that. Even Iranian Jews talk about that. They did the same thing in Yemen after the takeover of Yemen, they flew several jets from Yemen to Israel. And these are Jews that have been there for centuries, and they did not intend to go to Israel until early in the 2000s. So really, Judaism faced a lot of backlash in the region after the Nakba. And that, however, even if we as Arabs, we use the term when we want to kind of talk about Israel, we address them as Jews. We don't address them as Zionists. However, it is known that we are not talking about Jews that remained in our lands. Because even the Jews of Syria address them in the same way. Of Syria before the Israelis became the Jews of Syria, just last year. It's the same logic in which the Yemenis talk about Nasara, which are the Christians. And in their reference, when they talk about Nasara, they're not talking about the Christians of the region. They're talking about the Western world, which has historically identified itself as the Christian world. Right? So these have to come in their contexts. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't think there are any Jews left in Lebanon. I believe the last of them left somewhere in the late 90s or so. But yeah.
Just to be clear, when we talk about Jews, we are including ethnic Jews as well as Jews by faith.
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about Jews. Because most of the Jews here, they're not people that joined Judaism. They're historically Jewish.
You said earlier that Christianity and Islam are allies and can coexist. Is therefore Judaism the enemy?
No. Nope, it's not the enemy. To the extent of my knowledge, Jews in Damascus have had their own space. They've lived next to the Christian quarters, and they've lived next to the Muslim quarter in old Damascus. Historically, Jews in Al-Quds have lived right next door to the Christians, especially the Armenian quarter Christians, to the Muslims. It was never really problematic. However, Jews do have a more closed off religion than Christianity and Islam. And much like really any minority, but Judaism has its own, it also depends on what kind of sect in Judaism, because also Judaism is not like this one big thing, right? They did live a more Jewish life, but they did interact with the rest of the world, and they were not threatened by the rest of the world. And had that been the case, to put it clearly, no Jews would have existed in the region for over 5 centuries. Had that been the case, the Ottoman Empire would have eradicated all Jewish presence in the region. If you know what I'm trying to put forward, is really they have existed, and the fact that they still exist in Al-Quds and in Damascus and in other places, it's proof that no, there isn't. Even in Iran, which Iran is Persian, right? It's not Arab, but it has a mix of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish communities, and it doesn't seem to be problematic to me.
So, who is the enemy?
Who is the enemy? Enemy is not religion. The enemy is a project. The enemy is imperialism, hegemony. The enemy is anyone who wants to exploit our land, our faith, our history against us, and to drown us in fights and in killings that only serve their purposes and not ours. That is our enemy. The enemy is really, now I think we can call it the Zionist movement. We can call it Western interests. Western interests that are being enforced geopolitically, geostrategically through blood. They're not just being enforced. Everybody has geopolitical interests anywhere in the world. But to achieve it through dialogue, through negotiations is one thing, and to achieve it through blood is another. And economic warfare is as much blood as military warfare is.
But why does Israel see all of its neighboring countries as the enemy?
Because it is the enemy of all of its neighboring countries. They are not the enemy of Palestine. But when you occupy a land, you kill its people, you oppress them, you strip them away from their dignity, from their value, and you seek to eradicate them, and you seek to do much of the same to anyone in the surrounding, to make people live subjugated to you. People will not accept that. The Arabs, true Arabs, because collaborator governments tend to speak as if they're the Arab representatives, but they're as far away from Arab values as could be. True Arabs will never accept to be faced with an option that strips them from their dignity, and they say yes to it. And truly, any free human will not accept that. And the truth is our history, our faith, our culture, in all its representations. If we go now, because it was just Muharram and Ashura, if we go to Karbala and we see what happened in Karbala with Imam Hussein, we see that this is a people that is willing, even in the face of the greatest of emperors, because this is what Christianity did, right? This is what Christ did. Even in the face of the greatest of emperors, they said no. They said, no, there is one truth. There is one thing that is right to do in the face of this oppression, and we're going to do it. You can try to kill us, but we're going to do it. We might die, but there will come someone that will continue this path. And this has been true for thousands of years. And it will continue to be true. By that logic, even if we're all martyred, there will be a generation that will come back out and say, well, no, you're still wrong, right? That's what we believe. That's what history has showed us. So Israel does see everyone in its surrounding as an enemy because it's an occupier. I think that's pretty straightforward.
But what's happening in Europe? I mean, there's a huge Islamic problem that's taking over Europe. That's fairly well documented.
That's a backlash from what the Europeans have fed in our region for years, and we have warned about that. We have said Takfiri Islam is a monster that you are feeding against us, but it will blow back in your faces, and it's blowing back in your faces. And this has nothing to do with Islam. This has nothing to do with Islam. This is a political Islam that the West has fed for decades against our people, and this is what they're coming up with. Right. Islam here, as we know it, they're really mostly regular people. They're really regular people. But when you feed Al-Qaeda, when you feed the Muslim Brotherhood, when you feed the Taliban, when you feed HTS, when you remove the prescription of Jabhat al-Nusra, who used to play soccer with beheaded men, right? They used to use their heads to play soccer. This is well documented. These are the people that the West has decided to remove prescription against. So when you do that, guess what? Guess what? You're bringing all of the psychopaths in your regions. You're bringing all of the psychopaths that will at some point not be wanted here, not be allowed here. They're going to go back. What are they going to do there? What monster are you feeding?
A friend of mine, I don't know if you know him, Kuvok, a Muslim. He said that what you're seeing is not really Islam, it's more Islamis. What did he say? Islamism, which is very radical and very political.
I call it takfirism. It has nothing to do with Islam. It's as far away from Islamic teachings. It's actually, any Muslim scholar you bring would happily tell you it's devoid of Islamic teachings. It's actually contradictory to Islamic teachings. This is Western Islam. This is what they fed. If it blows back in their faces, you cannot blame me, the Arab. You cannot blame Islam. It's only you who fed that. And I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the West.
Yeah. Myriam, as we know, many people outside of the Middle East simply don't understand the nuances and the complexity of the region. And many more don't even know much about the Nakba. And they just think it was Muslims that got removed, but it was also Christians that got removed from what is now Israel. What is Christianity like in your region? Is it very small? Is it under attack? Is it growing?
We are under attack, but we're not under attack by Muslims. We are under attack by the West. As I said before, they want us gone from the region. In Al-Quds, we saw it through the Nakba, by murder, by blood, by direct killing. And we saw it after by immigration eradication, as I call it. We see the same here in Lebanon. Do you know how easy it is for an Arab Christian to get a visa anywhere, and how difficult it is for an Arab Muslim to get a visa anywhere? They're not the same. I remember I was still in Canada. I didn't get my Canadian passport by the time. I wanted to go to the US to visit someone, and I had to go give in my Lebanese passport, right? And at the time, I gave in my passport, and they asked you these silly questions. Have you been to Syria? Have you been to whatever? Because it was still the war in Syria. It was during the time of the wars and in Aleppo. And then I literally, while he was asking, I looked at him and I'm like, listen, I'm a Christian Maronite. And he's like, oh, okay. And he stamped my passport. No questions asked. That's how simple it is. Yeah. That's how simple it is. That's how fast they want us out. That's how much they don't want us to return. We are given better offers in terms of jobs. We are pushed to want to be more westernized. We are pushed away from our Arab identity, even in faith. We are really pushed generation over generation to look at ourselves and feel Western. In Al-Quds, Christians are pushed by the rhetoric of, if you stay here, you will face the fate of Muslims because, well, we cannot control them and we cannot tell who's who, right? The truth is, the Christians in Al-Quds, they come out to defend Al-Aqsa just as much as they would come out to defend the Church of Nativity. Just as much.
Is that
the truth is? Yeah.
Is that perhaps also a reason why Israel exists? It's to attempt to westernize your region.
Yes. It doesn't matter if it westernizes it or it dumps it into a chaos of takfirism. The idea is to eliminate the Arab identity. And that's why Syria fell. That's why there was a global war in Syria. That's why today what Al-Julani is trying to do is to strip Syria of its Arab identity. And that's what I said in the beginning of this talk, if you remember. Arab identity is all inclusive. And that being said, eliminating a component of it eliminates or breaks down the Arab identity.
Does Israel have a right to exist?
No. No, it's an occupation. Unless you allow me to come over to your place, take over your home, tell you to get out and give me a right to exist there, the answer is no.
But what do you say to those people who are living there now? It's not their fault.
The people who are living there now, let me be clear, there was never an intention for the Arabs to create an Israeli Nakba. It is the Israelis that are putting themselves in a position where every individual in Israel has become a soldier, has become a genocide enabler. Those that have an issue, well, they're welcome to leave. The airports are open. I don't think anyone has destroyed airports in Israel, and one of the reasons is we want them out. We want them alive, but out. And that's something Al-Qassam said during one of the prisoner exchanges. He looked the Israeli captive in the eye who was being released and told him, listen, we want you to be well, but we want you to be well outside of our land. This is our land. Give us our land, and everyone else in it will be safe. But you cannot occupy my land and ask me not to fight for it. That's really stupid.
What impact did the October 7 event have on the Arab world?
Before October 7, the Arab world was moving towards normalization. And at the time, normalization had significance. It was the liquidation of the Palestine cause. After October 7, any normalization today has zero significance. The cause of Palestine, not only will it not be liquidated, it has become central, necessary, and undoubtedly the most significant for the region to be able to survive. So October 7 has really changed the course of history for the Arab world and for the region. Despite all the pain and the losses and the sacrifices, the truth is that what happened since October 7 has brought us closer towards our liberation and our dignity than has Arab normalization ever did. So, yeah.
But the Arab world doesn't seem very unified.
That's what I was talking about earlier. Arab collaborator governments have nothing to do with the Arab world. They're generally merely tribes, especially in the Gulf region. They're merely tribes that were given power by the BRICS or otherwise to take control over pieces of territory that has riches that they wanted to exploit, and this is precisely what they do. So they're practically house slaves. They just have bigger houses. That's it. The Arab world, I believe, has made its position loud and clear from Algeria all the way to Lebanon, to Syria, to Iraq, to Yemen. And even if we look deep inside Jordan and we look deep inside Egypt, we will see there is a divide, a true divide. And the Jordanians and the Egyptian governments are terrified of any coup that might happen because it will turn the tables over their heads. The truth is that the Arab people will find their way towards liberation and dignity because now they see that truly US and Israel, we are not fated to live subjugated to them. We have other options. Even if it comes at a high cost, the cost is still lower than the cost of being subjugated to them. However, you will always see a divided people. Any revolution has had divided people. Vietnam, South Africa, any revolution, any liberation movement worldwide historically has seen opposition from its own skin and blood.
What's going on between Israel and the rest of the Arab world? Is it a forever war?
No. It is a forever war. It has been a forever war. But every forever war ends. And I don't think the West can sustain this war much longer. I don't think we're at war with Israel. Had we been at war with Israel, we would have been liberated a while back. We're at war with NATO. We're at war with the US. We're at war with all of the Western project, Western hegemony. We're at war with everything that the West has created post-World War II. That's what we're at war with. Is it going to be a forever war? No, because one thing is true, is that this is a war of attrition for them. For us, it's a war of dignity. And we might be able to strip them of all their riches much faster than they can eliminate all of us. So we'll see how long it will last. It definitely comes at a very high cost, and the cost is still going to rise, I believe. But we're looking at a war that will end because we're not going to back off. It has to end.
And I'm guessing Israel will be the loser.
Definitely. Because if it's not, then the war is not going to end. So yeah, it's the barrier state. They were used as tools. Some Jews that joined the Zionist movement are not aware of that, and now is a good time for them to be aware of that and find their way out. Otherwise, they're stuck in a game they didn't want to play, maybe, or they're there by choice. And if you're there by choice, it is what it is.
A lot of people also don't quite understand that Zionism is actually mostly driven by Christianity, not Judaism.
Yeah, the Zionist movement is mostly pushed forward by Christian Zionists, which is hilarious, really, because there is no such thing as Christian Zionism from a Christian perspective. You're either Christian or a Zionist. They really cannot be integrated into each other. It's impossible. And Christian Zionists have proved that it's impossible. These Christian Zionists are devoid of Christianity. They're devoid of the teachings of Christ. And they're devoid of any understanding of history or geopolitics, to say the least.
Is there a future for Christianity in the Arab world?
We are in an existential crisis. That's for sure. But I have faith that Christians, even away from the institutional leadership, they will rise up. They will defend their existence. And I am even more confident that it will be the Muslims that will defend our continued existence in this land, despite some complicity from our end, and despite us choosing in a lot of places to self-preserve instead of fighting for what we believe is true.
Do you think that there will be an increased need for sectarianism?
No. We are heading towards a lesser need for sectarianism. And I believe we are heading more towards the return of a new, cleaner Arab resistance and a much more foundational Arab identity than anyone has anticipated for now.
Yes, I mean, a large portion of what you're talking about is tightly integrated into identity.
Of course, it's mostly all integrated into identity because we do share a common identity. And I say this very comfortably because we are an Arab world that is part of the Islamic world. And while these two are separate things because the Islamic world is much wider than the Arab world, the Islamic world and the Arab world are foundational into each other. The Quran is in Arabic. The holy sites are in the Arab world. Islam is the bigger sect, if we want to say that, in the region. But it is not a threat to any other sect or ethnic group. And the truth is that within that Arab world, there is no option but for us to rise in a unified identity. Otherwise, we will always be slaves and tools for the West and their hegemony.
But it is quite nuanced. I mean, you have the axis of resistance, which is effectively 3 or 4 countries. Then they are part of the Levant, which is part of the sort of Arab Peninsula, which is part of the Arab world, which is part of the Middle East, which is part of the Islamic world.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's foundational into the Islamic world, but they are still separate things. There is no doubt in Iran that we are Arabs and that they are Persian, but there is also no doubt that the Muslims here and the Muslims in Iran share everything in Islamically. But they don't necessarily contradict each other. Your faith and your value scale could be, and in most cases is, separated from your language that you speak on a daily basis, from the food you eat, from the lifestyle you might have in terms of the details of the lifestyle, from a lot of things that have historical ties to your national identity. They don't necessarily need to clash. In a lot of places, sometimes they will, but in a lot of places they don't. But that's the nature of the world. It doesn't come from a kind of complete perfectionist point of view.
Well, to feed into what you've been talking about, I've got a friend who is a Christian, and he grew up in Saudi Arabia with his family for 20 years, and they went to church every week and found themselves absolutely in alliance with the Muslims. And he said that he will happily go back to Saudi to raise his family there, because there is a collection of values that is shared, and he doesn't find that collection of values shared, for example, in the US.
Yep, I completely fall in line with your friend there. That's what I was trying to say. We share a value scale. We truly do. We share a lot of how we see the world is truly shared between Christianity and Islam. The foundation of our faiths are based on love and how we understand it, dignity and how we understand it, righteousness, justice in the face of oppression. Right, these are the foundation of our faiths. While I said we do differ in the faith itself per se, we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, crucified and resurrected. They do not, and that will always be a point of kind of disagreement. But that does not create conflict in our day-to-day life at all.
But also, in the Middle East, there's very little of this LGBTQ nonsense with men trying to be women and women trying to be men, and all this
not the common
sort of inversion of reality, which is very, very, very destructive.
Yeah, it does exist more in Lebanon than in any other place. But the truth is, it doesn't have a foundation for growth. Even within the LGBTQ community here, you generally do not find leniency towards the psychotic version of transgenderism or whatever. Because now you can also go from like human to animal or whatever. And you don't find that welcomed even within the LGBTQ community, generally in the Middle East. And the structure of society still maintains high values. And in doing that, in maintaining those high values, it comes to show that whatever you do, it's the values that lead the society and not the wishful thinking or the hopes or the fantasies that are leading society. And it's also the needs of everyone's daily life requirements that lead the society, and the need to face a huge enemy that might kill you at any moment. It's, the complexity of the life here puts you in constant face-off with your values. And to understand that is to understand what it means to live and coexist with other faiths, not as coexistence, but as one, as a united entity in the face of such evil.
Okay, so if we come in for a landing, Myriam, what is the moral of the story?
The moral of the story is that Our Arab identity is at risk. It's what's being fought. Our enemy is not Islam as Christians, and Islam's enemy is not Christianity. There is no Islam that that happily calls on the beheading of Christians. This is takfirism. This is British-born, British-raised, US-funded version of Islam. We have nothing to do with it. We are fighting it. In fact, it's Muslims that are fighting it more than anyone else. So the moral of the story is, when you look at the Arab world, when you look at Islam, when you look at Christianity, when you look at the region, stop looking at it in bulks and start looking at it for what it is. Are Christians under threat? Yes, but from who? Muslims are killing Christians. What Muslims? Do ask the questions, because the war we are at today is a war for our humanity. It's for our identity, our culture, but mostly for the rest of the world. It's a war for our humanity, because what are you going to tell your children when you say you watched a live genocide unfold? Millions of Arabs being killed over decades, and you thought you were doing the right thing. How do you explain that? Right? How do you absolve yourself from that?
Okay, Myriam, how can I follow you and your work?
You can definitely follow me on Twitter. You can follow me on Substack. On Twitter, it's Myriam, MIRIAM00961. And on Substack, it's Myriam Charabaty.
I hope I don't butcher your name, but let me do this. Myriam Charabaty, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure.